Good afternoon. Today we're going to be talking about how to verify your genealogy records for your ancestors. So we're going to start by going over a PowerPoint showing several examples, and then I'm going to show you different records, different trees, and lots of different things to go through when you're trying to find your proofs. All right, so again, this is going to be how to verify records for genealogical proof. Some of this is going to be repetitive, but even for seasoned genealogists, a lot of these things we know, we have it in the back of our heads at all times, but hearing it again after you've been researching for years, doing the same things, sometimes hearing it can just make you remember or make you see things in a different light that you've just forgotten. So please don't ever be offended if you hear something repeated, repetitive, things like that. It's only helpful. It's never going to hurt to hear something for a second time. So again, where do you start? You always start with yourself, work your way backwards. So go to your parents, your grandparents, and so forth. Talk with older family members who are still living and learn more about your ancestors. These could be great aunts and uncles. And one thing to know is they may recall children that were born to their grandparents who died young, so they're not on specific records. These children who died when they were very young, they may not have any records to speak of. There may be a headstone somewhere out there that just says, you know, infant child of. But then again, they could be on a census record with a name, but then that's it. So that's why it's always good to try to talk and find out where these names are, if someone did pass away at a young age, what the cause might have been. Get these names, dates, and locations. The first record collection you want to start with, typically the first place most people start are going to be the census records. So you want to try to find an ancestor who was born prior to the 1940 census. And again, census were begun in 1790 for the original states. Not all have survived. So the 1940 census is the most recent census to have been released. This can be found for free online at many different sites. The 1850 to 1890 census will show who lived in the households by their names and ages. Now, the 1870 to 1940 census will show all of those, no matter the race, who lived in those households. The 1850 and 60, however, did not show or list the names of African Americans living in the households at that time. The more recent the census, the more information you're going to learn for each individual. The further you go back, the less you're going to know. They recorded typically more information each census. Sometimes it was about the same, but you would usually get a little bit more every year. Keep in mind that the census records can contain errors, and that kind of goes without saying. Almost any record can contain an error. It depends who gave the information, if the enumerator recorded it correctly, and if it was transcribed correctly. Always look at the original, not only the transcribed view. You may recognize a spelling error in the transcription. A name might have been skipped over, or what appeared to be a certain number was in fact different. One thing I've found very common is often a number 7 might have been crossed through. And so in some cases, the person transcribing the record might have written a 7 as a number 2. So someone is actually 75, but they wrote it as 25 because they thought it was like a loop for a number 2. And again, a 3 could have looked like an 8 in some cases. So if you ever see where a husband is, 86 and the wife is 32, but the children are in their 50s or or possibly living with them like that, look at the original, see if those, numbers don't quite match up. Again, if it's a third wife and she's much younger, that would make sense. But look at those numbers if they really don't seem to add up, especially if it says that the husband and wife have been married for 25 years and it says the wife is, I don't know, 22 or something, you know. You have to look at those numbers very carefully. So this is one of my first examples. This is a 1940 census that has my grandmother in it with her parents. And this is one that is interesting because the transcription was actually kind of off. Well, it was transcribed the same way the others were, but the enumerator wrote the information, or maybe was given the information, slightly incorrect. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but maybe if it's up here long enough, you'll be able to tell. Typically, they would write the last name first and then the first names. So they would only write the head of the household and write their last name, a comma, and then their first names, and then continue down, going and writing the first names. So the transcription in this case reads, and the green part is where I've got the transcription. The yellow one that's highlighted is my grandmother. And so the transcription reads, L. Glenn John, Laura John, Joyce John, Charles John, John John, and then Joe Bowers. So you can see that, or maybe you can tell that's not actually the name. His name is John L. Glenn. So for some reason, they wrote his name in the proper order instead of writing his last name first. Therefore, the person who transcribed this wrote it the way they considered all the others. They thought that the name at the front was the last name. So that can get very confusing because this is a record from Ancestry and it enters things in just like a computer. It does not stop to kind of think maybe this is incorrect. So this is why you have to stop and look at the original and try to figure that out. Also of interest, if you're looking at a 1940 census, you might look and see that there are little small X's with circles around them. The 1940 census is the only one that indicated who gave the information to the census taker, the enumerator. So in this case, my great-grandfather is the one who gave the information. So maybe he did not answer in the proper format, I'm not sure. But that is slightly interesting in that regard. And also, if you notice the very last name, Joe Bowers, that is actually here it lists as his stepson. That is my Uncle Joe Glenn, who his actual name was Bowers. And I've kind of mentioned this in the first and second part that names can get changed and they're not always legal changes. This is a case of my great-grandmother passed away in a car accident very unexpectedly when she had 3 young children. And another gentleman died in a car wreck the exact same week, and his wife had a young child also who was a baby. So my great-grandfather and I guess you could say my step-great-grandmother, they married mostly out of convenience, but they wound up being married for, I believe, over 40-something years. And so at first, he went by Bowers, but then he took the name Glenn, but he was never legally adopted. So that is another example of those. I would never have known about the Bowers unless I saw this census. But to this day, I have only ever known him as Glenn. So once you find your ancestor on a record, you want to take that information and apply it to try and find more records that match the family group. You want to match the birth dates, the place your ancestor lived, and who they lived with. You want to get that kind of family group. There may be many others who had the same names as your ancestor. You have to look at the small details to prove that that is in fact your ancestor and not someone else with similar details. That's why the census record is typically the first place most people look, is because it gives a great deal of information on many people right there together. So you get a snapshot of an entire family group at once instead of just a few details on one single person, typically. So keep in mind your ancestor may have been referred to by initials, a nickname, variations of their name, even gone by their first name at one point, middle name at another. And also, if someone decided to change their name in the past, they did not have to do so legally, just like I mentioned before. And if you have several members of the family who have the same name, they were often known by an alternate name amongst the family, but maybe not out in public. My family, we have several that, it's the first, second, and third generation. And so, and even some, if we have a reunion and have cousins, there's more. So, you yell out Joseph, you have about 6 different men turn around. So you have to say which one specifically you're trying to speak to. So that's why they would come up with nicknames and things like that. An example, on my father's side of the family, 2 of my uncles were both named Nathan after their grandfather. They were born the same year, though. And I've not met them. They're much older, so I was trying to figure out which one was which. And my cousin goes, "Oh, you have Nate and you have blonde Nate." And I go, "Thank you, Susan. That makes so much sense. These men are in their 80s and they are bald." So sometimes those ways of telling them are good when they're younger, but they don't always work when they're those descriptions when they're older and do not fit them anymore. So try to always know who's who by their name and not just descriptions. So once I applied all of those details from my grandmother's census record, I'm moving backwards. So her father was on there as John L. Glenn. So now I'm going backwards. This is the 1930 census. And remember, his wife on that one was Laura. This is the 1930 census where he's listed as Lawrence, and his wife is Levincy Glenn. And if you note, her parents are actually living in the household right above them, and their names are listed as J.L. Joyner, Saby Joyner, Hazel Joyner, Lillian Joyner, Pauline, and it actually has J.L. Joyner Jr., Christine Joyner, and it is slightly hard to read under Christine. The way the person transcribing it, they wrote Ellen, but it's actually Evelyn Joyner. So that's one of those that the person transcribing it got that incorrect. But also the one that has J.L. Jr., he's not actually a junior. The J.L. Joyner at the top is James Lafayette, but the J.L. Jr. is James Lee. Just because you have the same initials as in the first and second letter does not make you a junior. And that is something that confused me a great deal because I kept seeing junior on his records when I was doing research, but he did not have the same name as his father, which they did not realize. So sometimes you might have a junior, senior in your family, but they don't have the same name as their parent. So this is one reason I'm showing these different examples. You can follow these families, follow the family names and everything, but that doesn't mean you're always going to have correct information. So again, I'm working my way backwards. This is the 1920 census. And this one, if you notice, they have spelled my great-grandmother's name very interesting. The handwriting is quite different, however. So here they have James L. Joyner, they have Saby Joyner, Levincy Joyner, Hazel Joyner, Lillian with one L, Pauline Joyner, and then Patrick L. Russ Joyner, who that was actually Saby's brother, I believe. And then this one, which is very difficult to read. This is a 1910 census, and this is for Levinsky's parents shortly after they got married. So this, it has abbreviations for the names. So instead of writing out James, they have Jas L. Joyner, Saby Joyner, Susie. And again, I have a note, I didn't fill it out completely, but James's parents are listed above him with his siblings. And his father's name was Charlie, but if you can tell right here, they have an abbreviation for it. It's just Chas, C-H-A-S, and then a middle initial for B. So a lot of this is enumerators, how they decide that they want to use abbreviations, they want to use shorter versions of the names, initials. I've seen some census records where you could tell they were slightly lazy because every name, all they did was put the last name and initials for the first names all the way down. And I'm sorry, you know that nearly all women do not go by just initials. Several men do, but not all of the women. So that's one way you can know that someone might have been a little bit lazy that day. The second type of records to look for are going to be your marriage records. You can usually do this after looking at your census records. You have an idea of when they got married, because census will either tell you the year they got married, or it will have their children listed in there with their age, so you can get an estimation of how long they had been married, how many children they have, and several of the census records will either tell you the year they were married or how many years they've got married, where you can do the math. In the past, marriages often took place in the town or county where the bride was from. But for this, you must know the history of the time period to know if the town used to be located in a different county. So it's not as important for the county history, but the town history. Also, you will need to know if the courthouse may have record loss due to fire, flood, natural disaster, or such. Marriage records will vary in different counties, states, and again, we've kind of talked about this with different marriage records. This is the marriage record for my great-grandparents, J.L. Glenn and Levinsky Joyner in Mitchell County. They applied for their license on the 29th of August in 1928 and were married on the 1st of September in 1928. And I didn't realize it got cut off a little bit. It says the story was that they had eloped. And I actually was able to find this last year. It's interesting because most people always go to Ancestry to find everything. This marriage record is actually not on Ancestry. I had to go elsewhere to find it. But to begin with, because the story said that they eloped, I started looking in all of the surrounding counties. And it didn't quite make sense. But then again, her parents had lived in Colquitt County. And so if they technically eloped, that means that she would have gotten married somewhere her parents did not live at that time, which would be not Colquitt County. So that could fit that story. But once we knew when her first child was born, which was my grandmother, and we found them on the 1930 census being married, we knew we had to look a little bit before that. So luckily the book had an index and we were able to find the marriage record. For birth and death records, those are the two vital records that you'll usually go to next. These are not always easy to come by, and the records typically include personal information on others, so that's why they're sealed for different lengths of time before they're released to the public. Direct family members can request birth and death certificates of family, but you have to prove that you're related in a close degree, and often you have to pay for at least certified copies. Only 13 states recorded birth records prior to 1900 at the state level, and I'm saying this as a full state, some counties did record earlier than this, and only 14 states recorded death records prior to 1900 at the state level, and again, some counties recorded sooner than this. These are an example each. This is the certificate of delayed birth for my grandmother, Nona Joyce Glenn, and then this is the certificate of death for my grandmother, and by then she was Nona Joyce Glenn Wingate. And so you'll notice that the birth certificate actually looks quite new. That's because she was not really issued a birth certificate when she was born. She was born at home and did not go and apply for one until much later. The kind of portion right here, that was the original. So this being a certified copy, it's having that little almost square copy in the center, and then this is the certificate part that we had to pay for. What's interesting about it is, and again, I know it's probably hard to say, is it has her birthday incorrect. It was not reported until February of, I believe, 32, and she was born in November. And so the midwife, once she had gone to report it, she'd forgotten when she was born and gave the wrong birth date. So that's kind of interesting. And then her death certificate, and this is a copy of it, this is not the original. This is one of those that was in my mother's family binder that she did probably 25 or no, probably 35 years ago. And trust me, I got on to her for punching holes even in her copy. But we'll go over that a different day. But the death certificates, again, it's very hard to see, but they have numbers and they go kind of straight across and they have the different fields and everything. So this has a lot of information. The birth certificates are usually a little bit more reliable, and I say a little bit. But again, there's incorrect information here because the midwife gave the wrong birth date. Death certificates can have incorrect information because the person giving it was not there at the time of the birth, so they could give incorrect information on the parents and everything there. I'm sorry. And I have several other examples. My grandfather, when he gave information on his father's death certificate, he gave the wrong information. So you have to be careful with those death certificates. So other records to search. I'm going to go over a long list, but this is kind of a little bit of beforehand. These records may not be available for each state, county, city, or person. There's a long list of records that could be out there for individuals, but that does not mean that they're available for everyone. You want to keep in mind that sometimes you will hit brick walls. You're not going to be able to trace back as far as you can on everybody. Sometimes it's just going to kind of end. And as much as we all want to go back on every single ancestor, it's not always a possibility. You may not be able to find certain records for your ancestor, and there are many reasons for this. They were not in a location the record was recorded. So in other words, they might have lived in one place, but it was recorded somewhere else, so we don't know to look for it. They may have given a different name, which you are not aware of at this time. They never reported the event officially or until much later. There's been several times where someone, they wrote their last will and testament, they passed away, but either it was never probated or it wasn't probated until 25 or 50 years later. And so in that case, some people just believe that they either died intestate or it was, thrown out. They never reported the event. I'm sorry, I read that one already. They were born in a time that did not record births, and they died before being recorded on a census that listed possible family. That's probably one of the most common things that brings us to a halt with someone, especially kind of like revolutionary ancestors. We have a record of a soldier or even a soldier's wife who we know that they were there, they existed, they did this during the war, but we don't know who their parents are. We don't know where exactly they came from. We know they were in this location, they maybe got land and moved here and died around this time, but we do not know where they came from. We know who their children are and can go down, but that's kind of where things stop. The person died during either a military battle, killed by Indians, rebels, and again, that's kind of like revolutionary time period. They died while out, maybe just hunting or something, and the actual death date was just never recorded. I have an ancestor like this who would be one of my possible Wingate ancestors. The husband to my fourth great grandmother, he just basically vanished. We don't know exactly what happened to him. It would have been around 1828. So we don't know if he maybe just went hunting, he got injured and wasn't able to come back. Maybe he got tired and just left and went and found another family. We do not know. We have no records of him at all. So sometimes you're just going to hit that brick wall. These are lists of possible records that may contain genealogical proof for your ancestor. And these are going to be some long lists. I'm going to go through each one of them and give a little bit of an example. So personal knowledge, this is not always considered proof, but this will help get you started. It is considered proof when you were the person who experienced it, you were there at that event. If it is secondhand knowledge, in other words, someone told you and you are telling someone, that is not considered proof. Just be aware of that. Family Bibles are very important, but you have to have the copyright page and it needs to predate the first entries. Citizenship papers, funeral programs have a great deal of information. Journals, letters, and diaries. Although we've all seen where certain diaries and things like that can be a bit misleading as well. Photographs, older photographs, not photoshopped ones like today. Birth and death certificates. Although, like I've mentioned, death certificates can contain incorrect information as well as birth certificates. Marriage and divorce certificates, baptism records, church membership list and church minutes, the U.S. Federal Census from 1850 to 1940. And the reason I say those are because those are the ones that typically list the family names and ages. For most societies that require proof to join, they typically only accept the 1850 and onward. Mortality schedules, those are a form of census records and they give names, dates, and causes of death. Muster rolls, which is where soldiers have signed up and list what regiments they're in and so forth. Pension applications, so these are from soldiers who are applying for their pension depending on which war they have been in. You also have widows' pension applications. Service records, only up to World War II are public, however. Deeds and mortgages. Homestead applications, these are very useful, especially when trying to find land records and learning who lived where. And it helps you when you see the names of roads and streets and just general parks. It makes so much more sense after seeing the homestead applications. Patents and land grants, plats and maps, last will and testaments, administrations of wills, inventories of wills, court settlements, guardianship records, court minutes, court orders and decrees. The court orders and decrees make such a big difference over just court cases, because just because you see something in the newspaper, there's a case, or here's the last will and testament, the court order and decree is the defining. In other words, just because somebody left, this many acres to someone, they could have contested that in court. So you want to try to follow up with the probate record. You want to find that court decree to find out if everyone got what was supposed to be left to them or if it was divided up in some other way. Passenger list, crew list, oath of allegiance, alien registration cards, which is not what you might think, naturalization records, citizenship papers, job applications, which today job applications have enough questions on them, but if you can actually find job applications from, say, 50 years ago or further, think of the questions they might have asked and what great information that can give you. It would probably have, referrals or who have you worked for. So that's a great deal of information that you could get if you were able to find those. Burial registers, and that's also something that typically has a good deal of information because it would say who paid for the burial, what plot is it in, who else might be buried around them, and little things like that. Monuments and tombstones. When it comes to that, however, they need to date to around the time of the death, not a memorial stone with dates placed decades later. So when you see, which the government will place them for veterans, whether it was Revolutionary War of 1812, Civil War, War I, II, Vietnam, Korean War, any of those wars, if you have proof of service, they will put the standard memorial there with their name, I believe their rank, and just the dates. But those stones are made afterwards, sometimes years, decades, or even centuries after that person is deceased. That is not proof of your ancestor, and you have to keep that in mind. You want to find stones or monuments that were placed very close to the time that person was deceased, not a guess at the dates. I have tried to help some research an SAR monument before, but it was someone who had a name that was the same as another soldier, and they got the two mixed up, and so they put the birth year of one and the death year of another one, and they ordered the stone before checking, and they said, well, we've already done it now. So that's why you always want to not count just on a stone that has been placed there in the last couple of years. It needs to be a stone that has been there over time. And then when I say memorials, again, I'm not talking about just a headstone or tombstone. Memorials are usually kind of like historical markers that will give correct information. Historical markers and plaques, they have to go through a very rigorous process of being checked, fact-checked, and everything before they are able to have been put out, published, and everything. So those are usually fairly accurate. Funeral home records, you'd be amazed what you can find there. Sometimes funeral homes will let you go through the older records. Some even have published books with the older ones when they have either sold out or bought a new company. Newspaper indexes for births, marriage, and deaths. When I say these as indexes, it's not the same as certificates, but it's basically an announcement. So so-and-so had a child this day, so-and-so got married, Mrs. So-and-so passed away. That's still information that is proof of that because it's in a published newspaper. It's giving you a date, an approximate date at least, and giving you names and things like that. An obituary, of course, will give you more specific details of a death. Probate records, Again, those are all different types of court records. Auctions, that's kind of in the same place as when after they do an inventory and appraisement, they sell a lot of the estate, a lot of the things from the person's estate, but all of it is recorded through that. Court claims, that's typically when something is contested in a will. Indentures and apprenticeships, those are all going to have very well documented records also. Collections and repositories to help locate records often will only be citations, but will tell you where the information came from. So what that means is a lot of times those records that you found or that I had just listed, if you find those, it will have something that will tell you where it came from, because you might find it digitized or a different place. You want to find records that have a location. You want to know where they came from. So this is a list of different repositories that you might find such collections in. So libraries, genealogical societies, historical societies, reunion registries, family histories, biographies, pedigree charts. You do have to be careful of those. Genealogies, local histories, lineage societies, publications, oral histories, be very careful with those. Manuscript collections, vertical file surnames, and genealogical periodicals. So those are several different types of collections that you can find records in without having to, spend an arm and a leg at typically. Sadly, a lot of these places you aren't able to access at the moment, but most of these you can still, people are working there, and you can call and try to get in touch with somebody who can help you with most of these. Now, this is something that has come up a lot lately, especially since so many people are using online sources. When it comes to saving and using photos as a record, so in today's world, so many original records have been digitized, which is wonderful, but this also presents problems and confusion. So having a photocopy of an original document is still considered proof as long as you are able to cite your source so you know where it came from. The confusion comes from so many photos of records today that many beginners do not know the difference between what counts as proof and is considered a record and not simply a photo. With the many genealogy software programs and websites, this makes it even more confusing at times. And a quick example of this, if you've used Ancestry and you have a family tree, you can look at your tree overview. It will tell you how many people you have in your tree, how many records, and how many photos. And I've had several people get confused because, say they went to a courthouse to see original documents that have not been digitized, so they are not online, but they were able to photograph it and document where it came from and add it to their tree. So that is an original record. They have a citation, but when they add it to their tree, it is counted as a photo, which it is true. In Ancestry's kind of algorithm, it is a photo, but it is also a source. It is a proven record that you have a source for. There are other photos that can count as records, and then some that you just do not want to add at all. So I'm going to go over both of those real quick. So these are the types of photos that can be saved as a record and proof. So photocopies of originals. So wills, Bible records with the copyright page, marriage records, deeds, birth and death certificates, naturalization records, military records. All of these are things that you can have a photograph or a photocopy of the original and have your source citation and it still be counted as a record, not just a photograph. So original photos with names and dates written on them when the photo is taken, that photograph is perfectly fine. Historical photos that tell the history of buildings and people and things like that, those are fine. And of course, photos of probate records and things like that. And if you think about it, a lot of your digitized records, if you're looking at them individually, those are technically images. Those are technically photos. But when you're looking at it on a website such as Family Search, Ancestry, MyHeritage, Heritage Quest, it's also a document because it can be saved and brought up as that single document. So that's why you don't want to save those as images, because it can be brought up as that single record. These are the types of photos that I recommend to not include in your genealogical research. And I will kind of go over why. Everyone may have your own choice, but state flags and seals, I've seen this quite a lot. And I do work with Ancestry a lot, so most of my recommendation for this is kind of coming from Ancestry. So for state flags and seals, the reason for this is it's not something you're just going to have one of, and there's not exactly a point to having a state flag saved to an individual or a seal, because everyone lives somewhere. So in other words, there's no real point in having a flag for just a few people unless you're going to have them for everyone, and then you're just going to get out of control with flags. And the same with seals. I've even seen people who have posted pictures of quarters with the, state seal on the back, which has nothing to do with genealogy, absolutely nothing. Historical portraits. This is one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to genealogy, is taking historical portraits that are very well known, kings, queens, things like that, and just saving them to an individual in your tree so that you have a picture. That is not what to do, because then if you have a public tree and someone else sees it, they will save it to theirs, and it will get saved and saved and saved. I'm a bit of a restoration history buff for Restoration England, and so I've studied art history a good bit, and there's certain artists and people I can just see the picture and I know who the artist and know who the people are. And going through other trees, and then I see pictures and I'm like, that is not so-and-so. And, especially when they have them in their tree and I know that person had no children at all. So you have to be careful, and just because there's a picture of someone up there, that does not mean that needs to go into your tree. Brick walls, and I literally mean a photo of a brick wall. Yes, you are going to hit brick walls, but that's not necessarily a reason to put a photo of brick walls in your tree. The same with just a tree. A current state map. This one also kind of bugs me. Having an older map, say a colonial map or a map of Georgia from, let's see, what was it? The late 1700s, I forget which year, because Georgia actually used to go all the way to Louisiana. So at some point there were some states that they stretched a vast majority than what they were today. So having a picture like that, because your ancestor technically lived in what someone might think this state is today, but they technically lived way over here, I think that's okay, because that is helping you understand that better. But to have a picture of a state today for an ancestor who lived in the 1700s, that is kind of pointless, because most of those areas were not even established. War commemorations. And again, this is one of those that it's a yes and a no. Unless you're going to really do it for all of them, I don't see the point in doing for some. If it's something for more recent people in your family, yes, but not necessarily all of them. And by war commemorations, I mean, I've seen a lot of people who've been putting photos of flower sprays or like wreaths for war things. So it's like a flowered wreath for a veteran. Medieval images with no significance. So, you know, just the women with the flowing hair, stained glass, Joan of Arc burning at the stake. So things like that. Immigrant images. And I'm sure several of you have seen these where it's literally maybe just a ship with the word immigrant across it. And I've seen several lately where it's just the typical black hat that says immigrant. Neither of those are solely conclusive with immigrant. You can be an immigrant and there be so many different places you could have come from or reasons. So again, that unless you're going to do that with everyone, but then you are just adding numbers to your statistics that are there for kind of no reason. Ancestry has introduced the tagging system, so you can put that that person was an immigrant, that person was, you know, in whichever war that you would like to put, you have a brick wall for that person without having to add a photo like that. Images of Find a Grave logo or other sites, that one's been getting a little bit out of hand as well. Lately, I've been seeing job descriptions. So an apple on a desk for a teacher. I saw someone who was like a scuba diver. That's you can put a job description in the notes. You don't need a photo of a scuba diver on there. Military medals. Again, this is one of those that does need a bit of explaining. If it's someone who you have like the original military medals, you have theirs, and you have photos of them, by all means add those. But a lot of people I have seen who they have just a almost like drawn or clip art image of maybe a Purple Heart or something else. So it's not a real photograph of it. It's just a drawing of it, so to speak. And they just kind of add it over and over and over. So instead of saving it once and adding it to different people, Ancestry used to have a little thing where you could add like a badge to the person if they were a different medal recipient or something, which you can do. So don't get me wrong when I'm saying like military medals, you know, don't add those photos. By that, I mean, if it's just like a drawing of it, or just if it's not particularly theirs or pertaining to them. And then lately I've also seen images of Quaker or Indian or a slave image or just a saying. I saw someone with literally the, Quaker oats for an ancestor who was a Quaker. You don't need that. Yes, it might be funny, but no, that's not proof. That's not genealogy related. Book covers, common images such as wagons or ships. Another pet peeve of mine, in Bulloch County, one of the very common families are the Cone family. So William Cone and his sons, Aaron Cone, Peter, and all of them. And why so many people literally put a picture of a pine cone for them, I do not know. I do not know. You don't need a picture of a pine cone just because their last name is Cone. Reenactment images. This is kind of under a thing with soldiers. A lot of people will add, you know, say that they were in one war or the other, and it's just random military images or paintings. You know, just shooting guns or this or that. Yes, they might have been in the war, but if you don't know what battles they fought in, you don't know where they were, or even what rank they were in, really try hard to stick to what you do know. Because if you have a public tree and you're adding things like that, you could be sending the wrong message to someone. Because when people first get interested, you think about it, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So if they see these images, they're going to look at these images before they start reading these records or looking at any of them. So they might get interested because of the photographs and not look at the records, which is unfortunately what a lot of people do. So that's kind of why I'm giving this word of warning. You don't want to start off on a tall tale that isn't true just because it looks pretty. If you start off with what is and keep digging, you might find some very interesting stuff and later be able to add photographs that are related to this person and this individual. So keep searching. I'm not saying not to add any because there are several that you can add. I believe I've got well over 3,000 images in mine. The DNA symbol is one that is also kind of getting out of control. Yes, DNA is very big, but again, just having the DNA helix sign or DNA match or ancestor for someone, yes, if they're in your family tree, they should be related to you through DNA, so I don't know why you need that. I already kind of mentioned the soldier battle scene. And then flowers. Putting flowers on the Find a Grave website is one thing, but just having flower pictures for things on Ancestry or other sites, again, it's one of those just kind of taken up. And the thing for like the soldier and the battle scenes that kind of gets me is, yes, that is patriotic, but it's also at that time kind of like a profession. And I had someone in class one time who actually showed me this. She said her husband was, putting pictures of soldiers on all the men. And she said, well, that was their job. They had to do it. And her kind of comeback was, well, what about the women? What are you going to put for the women? He said, well, they didn't have a job. And she says, oh, yeah. So she started putting pictures of dishwashers and cooking and food and this and that for all the women in the tree. So try to stick to the research part. Try to stick to your genealogy proof, your things like that. If you have family heirlooms that are specifically related to an ancestor, by all means, photograph those and have that for that person. That is something that is related to them. But you don't need something that could be related to any specific person. You want it relevant to just a few people, which makes it more special and more important to that person. And lastly, periodically, you want to review your tree and try to fix any errors you've made, which everybody does. So whenever you get a chance, whether it's once a week, once a month, hopefully at least once or twice a year, check for duplicate individuals. So try to merge any individuals you have in your tree, in your family binder, anything like that. Make sure you have a record for each individual in your tree and that they are connected to someone else in your tree. You'd be surprised how many people you might have just floating out there not connected to anybody. Check the years of parents and children to make sure they fit. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And make sure your dates are in the proper format. If you get to someone and you just don't understand why you're not getting hints or getting any further, it could be your dates are in the wrong format or your location. So keep track of those. That could be what's keeping you from going anywhere. So I'm going to show you some different examples now. Okay, so going back to where the names, people went by different names. This is my second great-grandfather, whose name was Ransom Beauregard Wingate, which is quite a mouthful. So he went by Ransom typically, or RB. So almost every document that he signed his name, he's listed as RB. So we have several census records for him, his death certificate, marriage, the Army transport things, that was for his son who died in service. His tombstone does have his name fully spelled out, but his death certificate, which was filled out by, I believe, my grandfather. Let's see. Ancestry doesn't want to play nice today. There we go. So this is a copy of his death certificate. And so see, it just has RB Wingate, which is Ransom Beauregard. And notice no junior or anything. He had cancer, which is what he passed away from. And my great-grandfather, excuse me, was the informant. But what's interesting is he put his father's name as R.B. Wingate Sr., which was not his name at all. He knew his grandfather. His grandfather's name was Rozier Wingate, no middle name at all. And if you have a senior, the other is going to be a junior. So that goes to show you, you can have mistakes on death certificates. Remember how I said you can have people with the same name in different locations? This is my great-grandmother, Bella, who was married to Lewis Rosen. So I have them right here in a 1940 census. Well, excuse me, 1940. She's remarried because my great-grandfather passed away in 1930. But when I was still doing research before I knew when he had passed away, I had come across this one, which was interesting. It's Bella Rosen. She was born, here it says Poland, 1886, which is the same date, but they're in New York. Her husband's name is Lewis, and same place. They have a child, Samuel, but the other children don't match. But same age, same names, born in the same place, and they did come to New York to begin with. And some of these others matched as well. So it took me a while to kind of figure out, because I did not find when my great-grandfather actually passed away until last year. So that's what I mean about you can have two couples with the same name, same age, they were even born in the same place or very near the same place, but they have two different sets of families. So that's where that kind of split up. And then this is an example, Census-Bulloch County. She was always known as Jemima Bruton, but her name was actually Elvira. Her grandmother, her mother's mother, Nancy, or her mother, Nancy's mother, was Jemima. So she always went by that name. So pretty much every record that she's on, it might have been spelled a little bit different, but she's listed as Jemima. And that's nothing that was recorded anywhere else that, you know, I'm going to go by this name. That's just kind of how it was. Just like her husband was John Hendricks, but he went by Jack, which Jack is a nickname for John. So you have to keep in mind that people might have gone by nicknames at various times. That's what they wanted to do. And it would have been recorded that way. So this is a tree that is my cousin's. She has been working on her genealogy for longer than I have been alive. So she started back when you had to go to the courthouses, you had to make copies of everything. And like almost everyone when you got started, she got endeavored, she would find stuff and just start reading, but forget to write down where everything came from. She'd make copies, go home, look through everything. So she made mistakes, just like we did, just like my mother did. The reason I'm kind of using her tree as an example of a few things is I've been working on the tree my mother started for about 6 or 7 years and been fixing things as I've gone along. So I do have her permission. So one of the common lines we share right here is this Glen line that I was showing you earlier with the PowerPoint. So one thing I kind of want to show is right here, she has the Glens going all the way out to this James Anderson Glen. So born 1636 in Scotland, but she also has Virginia and died in Virginia. And so you'll notice the locations are a little bit unique. It's kind of this or that. And then the wife, Elizabeth Mitchell, born in Virginia, died in Virginia. So that's a bit different. So apparently maybe both of them were in Virginia. So, but the son, it says 1663, born in Kentucky, but died in Scotland. That seemed a bit odd to me. If you look up your history, Kentucky was not even established until the 1770s, I believe. And if that's the case, why would he have been born there and then go back to Scotland? And his wife, it says, was born and died in Scotland. So again, that's a little odd. And if she died in Scotland in 1711, and the son is born in Scotland, but died in North Carolina, that means that this young man is a little bit off. So when you go to look, you see that there's an ancestry tree. Probably some of these locations were pulled from that because, let's see, there's a Scotland birth record, Scotland birth, Netherlands, not sure what that is exactly, died in Scotland. So that's why you want to be so careful about those trees. Let's see, another example, let me go back here. And this is one that kind of really got me. Remember how I said to check those dates of the parents and the children and whatnot? So here we have one that here is a Thomas Newton born in 1600, died in 1673. But the parents, the mother is born in 1451 and died in 1499. So if we go to her, that means that, let's see, and if we look at her others, she had her first child when she was 8 years old. And then when she was 11, and then when she was 13, she remarried again. Oh, and then she had another child before she was born. So you see, and those are kind of the same names, but not. And that Thomas Newton is 1462 to 1496. And then you go down here, and here's Thomas Newton, who was born 101 years after she died. But if you click on him to let it open up, there's another ancestry tree. And again, you have England birth records for children, but nothing connecting it to the parents. And so you want to be so careful about saving other people's family trees, because that's how those errors get things mixed up. So she started off with everything on paper, which is the correct way to do it. You want those paper records, you want that paper trail and everything. And she was actually telling me today that she has all of these boxes and boxes of records at home. But once Ancestry came out and she started working on this, and it's not something everyone can work on every day, and those hints start popping up. And in the past, those hints did not always tell you the right way to do everything. And so people would start to save the family trees because they thought that would save information. All it actually would do would put in names, dates, and locations, but not save any records. And I think that is the biggest fail of Ancestry, is that it does that. I don't think that's going to pop up. But also, this is an example of those like DNA helix things that I was referring to in the photos. There's just a SAR kind of emblem. These are what I mean by some of that. There's another one, just one of the DNA, just a flag. That's just an Ireland ancestor. Again, if you're going to have that many ancestors from Ireland, but you continuously have a flag like that, that you're going to have so many of them, it's going to take up space. Having headstones, that's perfectly fine. But again, having a DAR emblem, you can join the DAR, the SAR under numerous ancestors. Having a picture of a field that a cemetery used to be at, but or a burial was, that's one thing. A direct line, again, you're going to have direct lines all the way. Switzerland, a ship. This ship is, I can't tell you how many trees I've seen just a ship on like that. You see immigrant, American Revolution, War of 1812. So see, things like that, it could apply to so many ancestors. You just kind of don't need that because it could apply to so many, and it's just going to mix up those numbers. This is David Alderman, who's in my family tree. And I had gone through most of his hints, and then I realized there were like 16, and there's 15 now. And what it is it's just more photos. So like I've already saved most of the photographs of his headstones and his markers. And so this is just more people who've added them. But if you notice here, it's just got like a string of numbers for a title. I already have this image, and I don't want that. I don't want one that's titled as image. That's just the entrance. Again, I already have it. So these are hints that are photographs that, yes, I've ignored because I already have them, and it's just the same thing, repetitive. I don't want duplicates of all of these. But then when it's like this, that could be for anyone. I have multiple Revolutionary soldiers in my tree. So I wouldn't want to save this as, just to one person. And I already have this in the tree, so I don't need that umpteen times. Direct ancestor. If it's in my tree, your direct ancestors double each time. So how many times would you need that in your tree? Because it also has the birth and the death date for him. So that was kind of made specifically. And then I don't know how this got put in here, a Francis Berry in Mississippi. This is Barber Cone, who I'm sure many of y'all are familiar with it as well. And again, a lot of these photos are just duplicates. I already have him in the tree. Same photograph. This little icon like this, just for a male or a female. Ancestry already has that kind of setup. If you don't have a photograph, you don't need to add just a male icon or a female icon. It's already there. This image, oh my goodness, I've seen so many on here who add it. Why would you add a picture of a pine cone? That is so silly to me. So silly. And then this is someone else's tree who adds a good bit of pictures. And it's like right here, it's just Revolutionary seal, Revolutionary War, just a wagon, the River Thames, Elizabeth Barnett Browning, Eli Whitney, Geoffrey Chaucer. Who knows who that is? English poet, and let's see, who are they attached to? Solomon Gross. Solomon Gross is, Brannan family tree, or married. Well, his daughter was Elizabeth Gross, who married a Brannan. I do not understand how Geoffrey Chaucer is part of this. But if you look, all of a sudden there's all of these images here that have absolutely nothing to do with this, and some of them that are duplicated over and over. So that's kind of one of my thing about, having proof, but you don't need all these duplicates. Here's a medieval German Principalities map. You don't quite need all of those. So when you go to your tree, you want to look at your tree overview. So you want your records to at least double, if not more, than how many people you have in your tree. And same with photos and stories. You can have a lot, but try to keep your photos to photographs, to headstones, to original records and things like that. Try to have proof of your records. Everyone loves photographs. We all do, but you want to have proof of your records. Yes, I have photographs of more recent family in mine, but I try to go back and I have headstones. I don't have boats and pictures. If you'll notice right here, there is an emblem right there, and that is one that I'm sure my mother had put in quite a while ago that I'm just noticing myself. See, I say there's mistakes that everybody makes, and I haven't taken everything out yet. But you always want to look through your tree. You always want to verify proof. You want to see what you have and do as much as you can to make it correct. And if you have any questions, please post them in the video in the comment section. You can post them on Facebook, or you can email them to me, and the email will be posted along with the video. Thank you.